Hello everyone, I am Abdul Ahmed, and in this video we would be resuming off with the second chapter of our textbook, that is personal identity. And in this video we would be covering its third part, that is part number 2.3a, which deals with the identification of the race of a living person, by studying variations in morphology, by studying differences in morphologic characteristics. And in the second part of this video, that is part number 2.3b, we would be studying identification of the race of a living person by doing osteometry. So these are two parts, and in both of these parts we would be identifying the race of a living person. Basically, when you are dealing with the identification of a living person, you need to consider many points. You need to consider that its sex needs to be established, its race needs to be identified, its religion needs to be identified as well. So you have to cover each and every point. And in these two videos we would be covering one point, one aspect of the living person, of the identification of a living person, that is its race. And in this part we would be studying identification of the race of a living person by studying variations in morphology, by observing how the differences in morphological characteristics help us in identifying the race of a living person. Okay, so now let's start. At the end of this lecture you would be able to define race, name different ways or parameters that can be used to identify race, and lastly you would be able to explain how variations in morphology, like differences in skin complexion, differences in hair color and hair texture, differences in the color of iris, differences in the structure of lips and clothes, can help us identify the race of an individual. Okay, so these are our learning objectives. So now let's start with our first learning objective, that is to define race. What is race? What do we mean by when we say that this person belongs to this race? So race, as we say it, is a sort of biological grouping within the human species, distinguished or classified according to genetically transmitted differences. So it's very important to understand here that race isn't something that is made by humans, that is made on a cultural basis. Race is something that is a sort of biological grouping. Okay, it is present in the genetic makeup of an individual, it is present in the genes, and it is transmitted from one person to its offspring as well. So that's why all the people of a certain race, they look similar, because there are characteristics that make up the race, all right, that allow us to identify the race of an individual. Those characteristics are transmitted, those characteristics can be inherited from one person to another, and this is how that's why we call that race is a sort of biological grouping. It is dependent on the biologics, it is dependent on the genetics, it is dependent upon the genetic makeup of the human being. Okay, so just remember that race is a sort of biological grouping, and the different groups are distinguished or classified, are different from each other because of the genetically transmitted differences, because of the characteristics that can be inherited, that can be passed from parents to its offspring. Okay, major groups of race. Major groups of race include: number one, Caucasoid or Caucasian, who are white or light skinned Europeans. As you can see in the picture as well, the boy who is present on the extreme right of your screen is a Caucasian. Okay. Number two, we have got Negroid or Negros, who are dark skinned blacks. And again, you can see in the picture, the girl who is present on the extreme left of your screen is a Negroid. Okay, is a Negro, who are dark skinned blacks. And lastly, we have got Mongoloids or Mongols, who are Asian people. Again, you can see in the picture in the center, we have got a Mongoloid, a Mongol person, alright, who are Asian people. So there are three major groups of race, and they are: number one, Caucasoid or Caucasian; number two, Negroid or Negros; and number three, Mongoloids or Mongols. I hope till now everything makes sense. You need to remember the definition of race, and you need to remember the major groups of race. Okay, moving on. to the methods of determination of race. How many methods have you got to identify the race of a living person? So you have got three major methods for establishment of race. Number one is by studying variations in morphology, which we are going to cover in detail in this lecture video. So by studying differences, variations in morphology and morphological characteristics like of skin complexion, like of color of iris, like of hair color and hair texture, like of structure of lips, you can easily establish the race of an individual. You can easily take a guess, all right, that what might be the race of that individual, of that living person. This is our first method. Second method is by doing osteometry. Osteo stands for bones and metric means measurement. So by measuring different aspects of bone, like of skull, like of limb bones, and studying those the proportionalities of one another, that is calculating indices, we can easily determine the race of an individual, or very least take a guess that what might be the race of that living person. Okay, this is our second method of race determination. And third one is multivariate discrimination function analysis. Just remember its name, that's it. We aren't going to cover detail of this method. We are going to cover details of number one method, first method, that is by studying variations in morphology, morphological characteristics, and the second method, that is by doing osteometry, in the second video. Okay, so we have got three major methods for establishment of race, and these three methods you have to remember the names, and you have to remember the details of the first method and the second method. Alright, so now let's start with the first method, that is by studying variations in morphology and the morphological characteristic that we are going to cover. First is skin complexion. So we are going to study differences in skin complexion and how those differences can help us in identifying the race of a living person. So first one, if we have got a fair complexion, if we got a very fair complexion, so most probably that person, that living person would be a Caucasian, would be a Caucasoid, who are white or light skinned Europeans, as you can see in the picture as well. Second one, if the complexion is dark or black, so that individual would most probably a negroid, a negro, or he could be, or he or she could be a southern Indian, as again you can see in the picture that this kid would most probably be a negroid or negro. Third one, if the skin complexion is brown, okay, light brown, so that person would most probably belong to Pakistani, or he would be, or he or she would be any other Indian as well. Again, as you can see in this picture, you have commonly seen among yourself that we usually have brown or light brown complexion. Okay, and lastly, the northern Pathans of Pakistan have a fair complexion. So in this case, you can use this information to help identify the race of an individual as well, especially if you are living in Pakistan. So these are the different complexions, and on the basis of these complexions you can identify the race. I'm just gonna sum it up. Fair complexion, so the person would be Caucasoid or Caucasian. If there is dark complexion or black complexion, then the person would be negroid or negro. If the complexion is brown, then the person would be Pakistani or any other Indian. If the complexion is fair, especially of a person who is living in Pakistan, then the race would be Northern Pathan of Pakistan. Okay, so this is our first morphological characteristic, skin complexion, that is a skin complexion. And by studying the differences in skin complexion, we could assume, or at least assume what is the what might be the race of an individual. Okay, moving on to the second morphological characteristic, that is the eyes, or more specifically color of iris. So we are going to study, we are going to observe the color of iris, and on the basis of different colors of iris we are going to determine the race of an individual. So if the color of iris is brown or dark, okay, brown or dark brown, okay, or black, then that individual would most probably belong to Pakistani or Indian. Alright, and if the color of iris is blue or gray, then that person would most probably be a European or Caucasoid or Caucasian. Okay, so this is it about the color of iris. and on the basis of differences in color of iris, how you can determine the race of an individual. Moving on to the third morphologic feature, that is hair color and hair texture. So on the basis of differences in hair color, on the basis of differences and variations in hair texture, you can determine the race of an individual as well. So if an individual, if a living person has got black hair color which are long and fine, so that person would most probably be a Pakistani or an Indian. As you can see in the animated picture I've added over here as well, that this lady most probably, or you can uh, easily identify that she has black hair that are long and fine, so she would most probably be either a Pakistani or an Indian. Based on the tika, I would rather say she would be an Indian. Okay, moving on. If the hair color is black and the hair texture is coarse and thick, then that living person would most probably be a Chinese and or Japanese. Again, I have added an animated picture over here, and you can see that these people have black hair that are coarse and thick, so they would most probably be Chinese and or Japanese. Third one, if the hair color is black and hair texture is woolly, short, curly, and arranged in tight spirals, so that living person would most probably be a negros or negroid. Again, you can see in the animated picture, and you would have seen in different shows as well, that how negroid or negros or black people look. They have, or their, and more specifically how their hair look. They have got black hair that are woolly, short, curly, and for ladies they are mostly arranged in tight spirals as well. So, and for some men as well, so they are negroid or negros. Number fourth one, if the hair color is fair, light golden or brown, reddish or blonde, and hair texture is fine and of any length, so that living person would be a European or an Anglo-Indian. As you can see in this animated picture I have added over here, said this lady who is having light golden or brown hair color, light golden hair color basically, and her hair texture is fine and of long length, so she would most probably be a Caucasian, Caucasoid, or European. And finally, just for the sake of completion, remember this point as well, that Sikhs have long skull hairs and Hindu widows shave their heads. So this is all about hair color and hair texture. I'm just gonna summarize it for you, that if the hair color is black and hair texture is long and fine, then the person would be a Pakistani and or Indian. If the hair color is black and hair texture is coarse and thick, then that person would be a Chinese and Japanese and or Japanese. If the hair color is black and hair texture is woolly, short, curly, and arranged in tight spirals, then that person would be a negros or negroid. If the hair color is fair, light golden or brown, reddish or blonde, and hair texture is fine and of any length, then that race would be, then the race of that living person would be a would most obviously be most obviously, yeah, most obviously would be European. He or she would be an European or Caucasian or Caucasoid. Okay, and lastly, Sikhs have long skull hairs and Hindu widows shave their heads. This is all about hair color and hair texture, and how the differences in these morphologic in this morphologic feature can help us in determining the race of an individual, of a living person. Okay, so the last two ones. About the lips, Negros have thick lips which are slightly everted. Just remember this information. And for clothes, you already know that traditional Indian dress, dhoti and sari, is different from traditional Western dress, suit and skirt. So if you have got a living person who is wearing a dhoti and sari, so your mind would firstly divert towards that this person might be an Indian. And if a person is wearing a suit, or if a lady is wearing a skirt, so the first thing that would come into your mind would be that person would most obviously would belong to West. So on the basis of clothes as well, like obviously this doesn't ensure the 100% identification of the race of an individual, but this makes us this helps us in identification of the race of a living individual. So by studying variations in lips, and by studying variations in clothes, by observing them, you can help yourself in identification of the race of a living person. Okay, so we have covered the first part, the first aspect, the first method of identification of a race of a living person, that is by studying variations in morphology, by studying variations in morphological characteristics. The first one is to study differences in skin complexion. Then you are going to move forward to the color of iris. Then you are going to move forward to hair color and hair texture. Then you're going to move forward to the lips, and lastly you have to cover the clothes as well. So you need to note down, you need to observe and note down each and every aspect of morphological characteristics of a living person, and on the basis of all these details, and obviously on the basis of osteometry as well, you're going to determine the race of a living person. Okay, I hope everything makes sense over till here. If you have any queries, any comment, any suggestions, you can drop them in the comment box. Do like and share the video and subscribe the channel. Thank you very much. Take care. Goodbye.